I'm Philippa, CEO of Paradigm Norton, and this is Life Matters More, where we explore ESG, sustainability, and the future of business. My guest today is Joshua Domb, founder of Gen R Law. After many years working at American law firms on regulatory investigations and compliance matters, Joshua pivoted to open Gen R Law, which he aims to build into a full-service law firm where every aspect of the law is practiced through the lens of climate change and ESG. Gen R is known for its Planet Before PEP ethos and for donating a share of profits to environmental causes, walking the walk on long-term stewardship. Joshua, welcome to Life Matters More. How do I find you this morning?
Thank you very much. You find me on my second coffee, so I'm in a good mood. It's just stopped raining, so not bad for a slightly grey September morning. No, delighted to be here, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, we met, didn't we, at an ESG conference, and I saw you speaking up on the stage, and you were just such a great interview guest. I thought I need to get you on my podcast, particularly to talk about what you've done, which is set up your own law firm. So first of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Gen R Law?
Thank you. That's really kind. Gen R Law is my attempt to build the law firm that I want to work at because I couldn't find it anywhere. And perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment. But if I sort of summarize the ambition, and I do still describe it as an ambition, I'm only a year and a half into what I hope will be a long-term project. Gen R is defined by really 7 key concepts. So the ambition is to one day have, number one, a full service law firm where we practice every aspect of the law through the lens of climate change. Number 2, we'll support that by contributing 10% of our profits each year to environmentally minded causes and charities. Number 3, we will have a specific focus on supporting the green tech startup community, who I think are particularly mission critical to our collective success. And number 4, we will invest 10% of profits each year in green tech companies to support those initiatives. Number 5, we'll do pro bono work in the usual way to support climate-minded projects. Number 6, we have a specific focus on empowering young people to be part of the work against the climate crisis. And finally, number 7, where we can, in due course, I would like us to start integrating lessons and ideas from Indigenous peoples around the world into the way that we conduct ourselves as a business and advise our clients. So in some respects, it's a little radical, it's a little different. Certainly it's got its USPs in the legal market, but also fundamentally it's just a law firm. And there's no reason that with enough effort and perseverance, I can't turn it into something that really makes a useful contribution to our collective work against the climate crisis.
Just so interesting. I really want to have a deeper dive into at least some of those things at the time that we've got. But first of all, I wonder how many of our listeners are sat there thinking, I've definitely thought about starting my own business, whether it be a law firm or something else. I've definitely thought I could do this differently. I could do this in my own way. But so many of us don't. So
Right.
I'm really interested in understanding what turned you from the person that thought I should do this to the person that actually did.
So being really honest with you and your listeners, Philippa, it was a moment of frustration coupled with, let's be honest, intense arrogance. And I think you've probably got to have a slight dose of arrogance to think you can do something as bold as open a law firm. If I just go back and set the context, I'm a white collar crime lawyer by training and background. So my work for many years was compliance, governance, bribery, money laundering, big investigations involving the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and work of that type. And I loved it. It was everything I had always wanted my legal career to be, since the idea of being a lawyer was first put in my head, I think, when I was 14 years old. But in the course of my late 20s, my early 30s, I became interested in climate change. And that interest grew and developed as I fed it with probably 20 books on every aspect of climate, nature, and biodiversity. And I got to the point in my late 20s where I had a full blown case of climate anxiety, which I'm sure some of your listeners will have either dealt with or be dealing with on an ongoing basis. It was keeping me awake every single night. And as much as I loved being a white collar crime lawyer, and it was the dream, it didn't take a lot of reflection to recognize that I wasn't doing any work that was going to make a material impact on the climate crisis. And so something was going to have to change. Being honest, Philippa, I didn't know what. I had never done any work that focused on climate change, not really. I'd never had the opportunity to learn how to be a quote unquote climate lawyer. I didn't really know what that was. And I was way too busy to figure it out. I was in one of the world's leading American law firms doing the American law firm sort of lifestyle and hours. And I didn't have the headspace to step back. Thankfully, part of my life plan was always to take a year and go traveling. And I planned for that over the course of 7 or 8 years and put that into practice in the summer of 2022 when my wife and I quit our jobs, packed up the house, rented it out, and flew to Australia. So I took firstly a couple of months off. I was exhausted. And then I started by writing, actually, Philippa, to a green tech startup company that my brother-in-law had mentioned to me that I'd become fascinated by. And I said, look, this is me, and these are my motivations, and this is the huge range of legal skills and experience that I have. But I don't know how to use any of this in the context of a climate-focused organization. I'm traveling for a year. Please tell me, what can I read? What can I think about? What can I be studying so that perhaps in a year when I return, I could be of service? And that, Philippa, was quite a scary email to send because it sort of signaled that my very comfortable American law firm salary was probably on its way out the window. But I clicked send and held my breath and got no response whatsoever. So I started chasing people at this company on LinkedIn. And after about 6 weeks of chasing what felt like half the company, I got a lovely message from someone in the HR department saying, you've got a great profile, but please leave us alone and go away. Which was slightly frustrating as a young person who'd put himself out there and was trying to do a bit good in the world. So I had a bit of a strop, and we finished our time in Australia, got to New Zealand. And I had a moment where I was thinking, okay, I don't want to spend the next 6 weeks going after another green tech startup company and getting nowhere. I think if I'm going to learn how to do this, I still didn't know what this was, by the way, I need to go and work at whichever law firm is dealing with climate change. I'll go there. I'll be a senior associate in their white collar crime team. They are bound to have one. I'll learn all of these skills that I need to learn for 3 or 4 years. And then I could go and be a head of sustainability or a general counsel, or whatever it might be. So picked up my phone, opened the 2 main legal directories, and I got stuck. It took me about 10 minutes to realize that I was not interested in becoming an environmental lawyer. That wasn't what I wanted to do. And I found over the course of my several weeks of searching, lots of lawyers, and occasionally a small team, that were doing some aspects of what I thought this was supposed to look like. But all of these lawyers and teams were scattered amongst the 200 law firms that I knew very well in the City of London and around the world. And I make no criticism. They're all very good firms doing great work and giving great legal advice. But they're also just big corporate commercial firms doing whatever work came in the door without a particular mission or focus in this space. I had assumed in my ignorance that in the same way that, for example, when one thinks about banking, one goes to Allen and Overy, one thinks of insurance, one goes to Clyde's. These are the firms that you sort of think of about that work. I thought there was a firm that everyone was just going to whenever they were thinking about climate and ESG, because it's climate, right? And I knew enough then, and this is sort of 3 years ago, to already understand that there will not be a mega trend over the next 50 years that has a greater impact on businesses all around the world than the climate crisis. Where there is disruption, there is always need for good lawyers who are conversant with the relevant issues. And more fundamentally, when I reflected on it and I thought, what is it that we need to do to move from where we currently are to where we need to be? Well, the first and most important lever is we need governments around the world to get on board and pass the right laws and the right policies. We need scientists and engineers to help us develop the solutions to the gaps that we're facing. We need money to flow. And all of that needs to be documented by lawyers, right? None of these first three things happen without lawyers sitting at all of those tables. We have such influence, we have such access in our profession to decision makers at every level. And I thought there was a law firm that was doing the work. I thought there was a law firm that was leading on it. And it took a few weeks of searching, but I had this dreadful realization that there was no law firm that was doing this work. There was nothing with respect to my colleagues even vaguely close, and that really upset me. That really, really upset me. I felt really frustrated that it was 2022, 2023, 8 or 9 years post Paris Agreement. The world was already 1.3 degrees too warm. And in London, the most mature legal market in the whole world, I couldn't find one law firm where I thought I could go to learn the skills I needed to learn and to do work that aligned with my values. And so at some point, somewhere on the North Island of New Zealand, driving along with my wife in this little camper van, I had this really arrogant moment where I thought, screw it, I'll open it, which wasn't serious. I really wasn't serious. I was just frustrated. But there was something about the concept that just wormed its way into my mind. And I started imagining what it might be like to walk around that firm where the corporate lawyers, the banking lawyers, the funds lawyers, the employment lawyers, so on, so on, were exceptionally good at what they did. But their specialism was that they practiced their area of the law wherever it interceded with climate and ESG considerations. And that work is only going to become more important and wider in its scope over the years ahead. And it was ultimately that moment of frustration and arrogance that led me to buy a notepad. And I sat down in a farmer's field 10 miles south of Auckland on New Year's Day 2023. And I thought, okay, I think problem number one is that the law firm I want to work at doesn't exist. So let's start there. And it was that scrapbooking process that led to that sort of 7 bullet point framework that I described to you a few moments ago. And that's where Gen R came from. And that's how I've ended up on this most unexpected of journeys.
Well, congratulations. I mean, I think it's an incredible story, and I have a picture of you sat in a field with a notebook,
I've
scribbling
got a
down
video of
some
me
ideas.
chasing chickens away from the van with a jumper. Maybe we'll include it in the show notes. It wasn't a glamorous location, but I think a lot of the time these epiphanies don't come in this grand moment of revelation. It's a circumstantial thing, and it's a slow moment. It's a slow process of following that sort of feeling of intuition. I think when I look back, what's really interesting, and perhaps the answer to why so many of your listeners will have thought about doing this work, but ultimately not done it, is because they're busy. They've got lives and families and jobs. And I was away from all of that. I had the time to just think and just to slowly process and work it through. And without that year away, this would never have happened. This would never have happened.
I think it's such a truism, particularly around professions which are built on hourly rates, is that actually and I was a lawyer for 20 years, as you know, and you know that niggle, that discomfort in the back of your mind, you can put it down because you've got 7 chargeable hours to do that day. So actually, you can't think about that niggle, you can't think about the discomfort, or you can avoid thinking about it. And as humans, we don't like to feel uncomfortable about things, so we distract ourselves with other stuff. So I think you building up to taking that time and that time away to be able to think is so inspirational, actually.
That's
To well, having that time to really examine those thoughts and feelings is something that most of us don't take the time to do.
And we need to be
And
very deliberate about carving it out
yeah,
in the course of our careers, because we all get so busy, don't we? And before we know it, another year's gone.
we're 50.
Right.
Yeah. Um, One of the things which I think is really interesting as well is the fact that in order to keep yourself right, I'm just putting a word in your mouth, really, you have used the tagline "Planet Before PEP." Now, for any listeners they won't all be lawyers, who won't necessarily understand what PEP is, for you and for me, it was very real when I was an equity partner. And so PEP was very important to me. And PEP, for the listeners, is profit per equity partner. Most law firms will have a full distribution model where they will pay out all of the profits every year. And You basically take those profits, divide them up between your equity partners, and that is your profit per equity partner. It's a very important metric for lawyers, particularly equity partners. You have flipped the dial on that, which is a really brave thing to do. And you've gone out into the world and actually said planet before PEP. But what does that actually mean in practice? And it's easy when it's one of you. What's that going to look like when there's more?
That's a great question. So, what does it look like in practice? It means having a willingness as a firm to turn down certain work and turn down certain clients if that work and those clients don't align with our values. I want to be really clear about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that we're not capitalists, right? And we're not minded towards making a good living and making a decent go of it. It means that there are certain things that we are not going to do in pursuit of billable hours and hourly rates. And actually, when I was reflecting on whether it was the right thing to open a new law firm to try and do this, or whether I would be better off going to one of the law firms that I knew and sort of using that platform, one of the challenges that struck me, and I think this goes nicely to your second question, Philippa, is that in any existing law firm, and again, this is not a criticism, you will have a huge range of partners and associates, a legacy book of clients and a legacy book of work that is being done. And some of that will be, completely aligned with the values that I have, but a lot of it won't be. And often, unfortunately, the reality is that, particularly in some of the largest firms, the clients that have really paid the bills are big oil, big chemicals, big mining, etc., etc. And that's not to say those things are inherently bad, but that's the reality of what's been keeping the lights on and what's been keeping that PEP figure nice and high. And the idea of coming into any of those firms and persuading the partnership that we should about turn our business model and suddenly integrate this concept of planet before PEP, which aligns really nicely with Paradigm Norton's own approach of, money matters, but life matters more. It's the same thing, just in a legal context. The idea that I'll be able to persuade, 60, 100, 2,000 lawyers that we should suddenly take this approach is essentially an impossibility. And in large part, Philippa, and again, I'm not criticizing, that's because lawyers are not climate literate people. Climate change has never been part of legal training. ESG has never been part of legal training. It wasn't until I think 2023 that the Law Society of England and Wales first published a guidance note for lawyers about climate change, which I find extraordinary, again, given that that's already 8 years post-Paris Agreement. But fundamentally, a lot of lawyers don't see this as their job. And they take the view, which I have some sympathy with, that if it's legal, then it's fine to advise on it. And again, I don't think that's necessarily wrong. How do I ensure that we stick to this mission as we grow? It's by making sure that the lawyers that come in the door share my passion. And actually, there are hundreds of us. There are thousands of us around the world. And for those lawyers, actually, it's really refreshing to think that they could have a home where they're not going to be required to do work that doesn't align with their values. They'll still make, I hope, plenty of money and a very good living, but there will be a real joy in working with our clients to identify those charities that we want to support using a really meaningful portion of our profits. So it's about getting the culture right from the start. It's about making sure that we're very clear on our purpose. And then it's about finding people who align with that purpose. And actually, going back to that question the comment you made earlier, when I opened the doors, I got 50, 100 emails and messages from lawyers all around the world saying, finally, a law firm with real climate focus and integrity around these issues. And probably 70% of those messages came from young people who were wanting jobs and wanting work experience. And I had to say, I'm really sorry, but it's day 3 in the firm's just me. But 30% of them were people in their 40s and 50s saying, where was this law firm when I quit the law 10 years ago? Because I couldn't find a law firm that aligned with my values where I could do the work that I wanted to do without the pressures of a relentless focus on profitability at all costs. And so I think that Planet Before PEP as a guiding concept, as a guiding principle, is a nice, easy, digestible way for us to frame any key decisions that we have to make. Will this be good for the planet, or are we just doing this for profitability? And if it's the latter, then we know what the answer is.
I will be following your progress with such interest. I mean, I feel the same. I'm no longer a lawyer because it wasn't congruent with my values.
Right.
And that niggling discomfort wouldn't go away. And that's why I now work for a firm where life matters more than money. And
Yeah.
I think it speaks to a lot of people. I think you're absolutely right. And I wish
Absolutely.
you the best of luck with it.
Thank
You mentioned there your self imposed requirement to donate, is it 10% of your revenue to profits to environmental causes? I am super interested in impact. So I often talk to people about, well, yes, absolutely, we should all be putting the right bottle in the right bin. And cycling to work is fantastic. And the reason my hair is still wet, as we spoke about earlier, is because I ran into work this morning. But how do you choose charities where it's actually making a difference? So what's your criteria? How do you go about that?
So at the moment, and whilst the firm is just me and the numbers are inevitably a bit more modest, it's those organisations that I know well and have been following for some time and that are really transparent about the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having. So at the moment, it's community organisations. It's not one. I mean, one of them that I've got in mind isn't actually a charity. It's a community interest group, but they're doing amazing work supporting young people to help them upskill on these issues, and that's the sort of initiative that I'm really pleased to be able to finance with a little bit of my profits. Another charity that again, forgive me, they're not a charity. Again, it's a community interest company. Is a group called Mossy Earth, who do amazing rewilding work all over the world. And actually, they make the most beautiful videos, which they post on YouTube, introducing all of the projects that they're working on, showing the impact that they're having and allowing you to track it over time. If any of your readers ever need if any of your listeners ever want a little bit of a pick-me-up before going to bed, I highly commend Mossy Earth. So that, for example, is just two organisations that I know and that I'm supporting at the moment. In due course, as hopefully the numbers get bigger, as there are more clients that we are supporting through Gen R, what I will do is bring clients in on that process and say, are there any charities in this space that actually you're already supporting or that you're particularly interested in seeing us support? And I would love to get to a point where our clients are essentially voting, which charities would we like to sort of divide the pot up between this year? And those donations will not be on behalf of Gen R Law, it will be on behalf of Gen R Law and our clients. And I think we can make it a group effort rather than just a law firm effort.
And so talking about clients, do your clients care that you are giving money away? Is it relevant to them? Do they know? Are they instructing you because of that?
So I don't think that that feature in and of itself will attract instructions, right? But if you can demonstrate the competence to do whichever mandate it is something that they are really delighted to see, that 10% of profits are going to charities. It's a really positive conversation that I get to have with my clients and my key contacts at those clients. One of the things that's interesting to me about being a lawyer is that when you think about climate and ESG, they're often poorly understood in a corporate context. They're seen as a risk, and risk goes to legal. And so increasingly what you find is that the general counsel is also the head of sustainability, or they chair the ESG committee. And even if these are not topics about which they've previously been particularly passionate, once it lands on their plate and they start to slowly upskill themselves, they become really passionate about it. And that's where a proposition like Gen R is particularly attractive to those kinds of individuals. What I have had with several of the GCs that I support who are particularly excited by these issues is they've said to me, actually, I've gone to my other law firms and I've said, we work with one firm that gives 10% of profits each year to charities. What are you doing? And it is not going to shift the needle immediately. But again, in time, and I'm only 35, I've got 40 years to make this into a success. In time, when hopefully the figures involved are much more significant, I hope that will have a little bit of a drag effect on at least some other law firms where there is more of a focus on impact in that holistic sense to perhaps follow suit. A lot of law firms do already give a lot of money to charitable causes. A lot of them tend to donate their time, and that's how they value it. We did X value, worth of hours as pro bono. But fundamentally, I think, free advice only gets charities so far. Sometimes what they need is financial support. And we all know that law firms are very capable of generating huge sums of money. And actually to take 10% of that and support good causes and good initiatives, that's not going to put any of the partnership on the breadline, I don't think. And it's something I'm delighted to be doing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And we have a trust here, and actually so obviously we're a bigger firm than you are currently. The ability of our staff to get involved in that trust and to meet with the charities and to see how the support actually changes and to give them that regular support as well so they can rely on it I just think it's so important. So moving a little more, so we've talked about why you set it up. We've talked about the huge differences, the radical differences that you have implemented in your amazing law firm. We've talked about your giving and the response of your clients. I want to talk a little bit about more sustainability, and I want to talk about how you might advise a firm, be it law or something else, to talk about sustainability. Where do most organisations go wrong when they talk about sustainability? Is it that they are just there? I heard the phrase greenwashing the other day, which I'd never heard.
Yes.
Greenwashing, yes.
Yeah.
Is it language? Is it data? Is it governance? Where do most firms go wrong when they're talking about this sort of thing?
It's a great question. And unsurprisingly, perhaps a large part of the work that I do is advising companies on sustainability claims and greenwashing risks. One of the phrases that I heard, I think during this year's London Climate Action Week, that definitely chimed with that which I have seen, is the path to greenwashing is paved with good intentions. The path to greenwashing is paved with good intentions. So when it comes to getting sustainability claims right, and therefore managing and reducing your greenwashing risk profile, I treat it, perhaps unsurprisingly, given my background in governance, as a governance exercise. And so where I think companies generally go wrong is firstly with the best of intentions, but more fundamentally, it's because they haven't taken the time early enough in their journey to put the correct governance in place around the process that they will follow as and when they are making green claims. And it's getting that governance right, which fundamentally will help ensure that the data you are relying upon to support any green claims that you're making is accurate, but also making sure that the language we're using is appropriate. And if I can offer an observation, which is not just mine, I've heard it discussed very widely, you can tell a lot very quickly about a company's greenwashing risk profile by where the sustainability team sits in the organization. If the sustainability team sits underneath the marketing department, that's a flag, right? Because that tells you something about the approach that business is taking to sustainability. And similarly, if they sit under, say, the CFO, that tells you something about the approach that the business is taking. If they sit under legal, that tells you something about the approach that it's taking. but it's often those companies where sustainability is seen as a marketing exercise, where that risk profile is perhaps unavoidably pronounced.
Yeah. So I hadn't thought of it in that way before, but that's such a great insight into how it's viewed within the company,
Right.
as to where it sits. Um, I don't want to dig a bit deeper into that governance question. You mentioned governance a couple of times there, and I've been having some quite interesting conversations on ES and G, and a lively debate as to whether or not the G becomes before everything. So there is a theory that if you get the governance right, actually any well-run firm will have the S and the E
Yeah.
quite high up their priorities. So I'd be interested in your view on that. So that I think there is an argument that governance is almost more important than sustainability and social and environment, because it should lead in that direction. But that may well just be an overlay that I've put on it. But I'd also really like to hear whether you've got any obviously confidential stories about a company that's done that really well, how they did that differently. So where did they have their sustainability team? Was it under marketing or was it somewhere else?
Right.
How do they go about that? So two quite big questions in there. Apologies.
Why don't we pause the recording and start a fresh 1 hour podcast? Because we could definitely spend an hour on just those two questions. But let me try and address them rather more shortly. So, to take your first question initially, one of the great characters that I came across quite early on my journey into this space, and now a very good friend of mine, is a guy called Paul Clementine. Paul led the team at the United Nations that coined ESG in 2004. And when you hear from him the story of how they got to ESG, it's quite sort of entertaining, in that you imagine Paul and his colleagues sitting in a room and they've got these three issues. They've got governance considerations, environmental considerations, and social considerations. They know that an acronym is helpful, and they've got to work out the order that they put the letters in, right? And it was a group of people sitting around a table figuring it out. Paul will tell you that it should be GES. Of course it should. The governance should come first, because it is fundamentally getting the governance right that allows you to effectively deliver on your environmental and social objectives. But if you go back to 2004, governance was already reasonably well known and reasonably well understood. And the concern that Paul and his colleagues had was that if you put governance first, then everyone would look at ESG or GES and think, oh, it's a governance exercise, we're already doing that. And they wouldn't really pay much attention to what came afterwards. They thought environmental issues are sexy and topical. So start with the E, because that will draw people in. Everyone already well understands the G, so let's put that at the end. And the social piece is actually less well understood, and it needs to be protected. So if you sandwich it in the middle, ESG, you've got something that will suck people in, a final concept that's familiar, and a safe space for that social piece to occupy. And that is the story of how it came to be ESG. Not necessarily because it's the right order, but because it was the right order for the goal that the team that Paul was leading was seeking to achieve. Paul will also tell you that it also just rolls off the tongue nicely. ESG, ABC, 1, 2, 3. And he knew instinctively, his background actually was in tabloid journalism. He knew instinctively that as a line, it would land more easily. So that's how we got to ESG. But to answer your question, you're absolutely spot on. Of course you are. The governance comes first. And that term governance is one that it's interesting to just pause and reflect on for a moment, because it can mean so many different things in different contexts, not unlike ESG, which is perhaps where the acronym has run into a little bit of trouble. When I think about governance in this context, I think the most important thing actually is corporate culture. It is a company's culture reflected in its mission, its vision, and its values, and disseminated with authenticity by the senior management through the organization, that will ultimately come to be reflected in the governance structures that the organization implements. And the effectiveness of those governance structures, I would suggest to you and your listeners, is unavoidably intertwined with the authenticity of the corporate culture.
Mm.
And if a company which claims to care about environmental or social issues truly does, then it will get the environmental policies right and it will get the social policies right. Or at least it will make genuine, honest progress on those topics because they're difficult topics to get right. Um, those companies that claim to care and have the big slogans, but actually they fundamentally don't, that's often reflected in not the governance, but a lack of governance. Because they might say that they care, but when you pick beneath the surface a little bit, actually there's no real substance to the initiatives. It is, to go back to what we said before, a marketing exercise. And as I would increasingly call it, it is an act of corporate greenwashing for which actually there are an increasing range of financial, legal, and reputational consequences that businesses are now increasingly finding themselves exposed to. So, to answer your first question, yes, the governance should come first. I think even the creator of ESG would agree. It didn't for practical reasons at the time in 2004. But in this context, when we think about perhaps businesses that are just thinking about getting started on that journey, really sort of still coming to ESG fresh, um, where do we begin? We begin with the corporate culture, and we get that reflected in the corporate governance, and everything will flow from there, and our success will flow from getting that first question right. What's our mission? What's our vision? What are our values? And how are we going to genuinely drive those things through every layer of our organization? So that's question one. Question two, an example of a company that I think has done this really well. The great news is there are so many, and again, we could talk for an hour just about the real successes that so many companies have had, turning that real focus on culture and doing the right things in the right way into business models that have really succeeded. One example that I like to discuss in this context is Monica Vinader. So Monica Vinader is a jewelry company that I first heard of because my then girlfriend, now wife, really liked them. A brand that she's always enjoyed. By pure chance, I ended up getting to know earlier this year the former head of sustainability at Monica Vinader, phenomenal lady called Olivia, who's actually now working at Volvo. But one of the things that she introduced at Monica Vinader, which since its inception has been a purpose-led company, is a transparency initiative, whereby if you go onto the Monica Vinader website, I think it's about 60% of their products, they have what they call a product passport, I think it is. And it shows you how every aspect of that product has been sourced and manufactured, from the raw materials, wherever they have been gathered from, right through to where they've been assembled and how they've been brought to you in the store in the UK. And that, quite complicated to pull off, and I think it's a real achievement in and of itself. But what it gives you as a consumer is real confidence in the integrity of the supply chain that sits behind the necklace or the bracelet that you're purchasing. And for the rapidly growing, I would suggest to you, segment of consumers for whom ethically sourced and sustainably sourced products is increasingly important. And that is an example of a company that I think, by taking smart action early and doing the hard work early, has really given itself a USP. Really given itself a USP. And if you go onto their website, actually, they've won a real glut of awards over the last couple of years for their sustainability initiatives from some really quite prestigious organizations and institutions. So Monica Vinader is one example, and there are so many more that we could reflect on, of a company that I think, A, has got the culture right, B, that has translated that into meaningful action, which has given them a real USP in a very competitive and crowded market, which I think will increasingly help them to attract and retain climate and environmentally minded consumers.
Yeah, I mean, the supply chain thing is really hard, isn't it? It's really, really hard, and presumably you do quite a lot of work in that
Yeah,
area with your clients.
absolutely. So a lot of businesses have had a focus on their supply chain for many years. One of the things that prompted them perhaps to formalize the way they were engaging with their supply chain was the UK Bribery Act 2010, came into force in 2011, um, and caused a lot of companies that weren't already sort of risk assessing their supply chain to start to do that in a meaningful way. Started to introduce, in that case, anti-corruption clauses into their contracts with their supply chain, got them to develop things like supplier codes of conduct, and generally upgrade their focus on that G in ESG. Fast forward a few years, we got the Modern Slavery Act 2015. We've now had its 10 years anniversary, and again, a lot of companies leveraged that existing infrastructure that they had to start to risk assess and then disseminate human rights focused considerations through their supply chain. And now, as we've got this increasing focus on the provenance of goods, products, and services that we're purchasing, and any harm that might have been done to the planet and the natural environment in the course of generating those products, businesses are again going back through their supply chains and really trying to understand, where are we sourcing our materials from? Um, who are the individuals who are doing the work of assembling it? What factories are they in? What conditions are they working in? Where is this cotton come from? Where have these these gemstones come from? And it's difficult. It's tricky. It's also a space, Philippa, where there are a lot of laws that are coming onto the books in short order, and where, once again, as we've seen in the greenwashing space, the risk profile that is attached to getting these things wrong is rapidly growing. So, yes, to answer your question, this is certainly an area where I do a lot of work with clients, just to help them manage the risk associated with their supply chain. And I don't think anyone will ever get that perfect. Supply chains are just too complicated. But certainly you can take a lot of positive steps to start to reduce the risks where you identify that they are more likely to occur.
And when you're working with those clients, I'm interested in stories, and I know, of course, confidentiality is absolutely king for any lawyer. But I don't know if you've got any stories of maybe like sort of a near miss. Um, what changed? What were you able to do for them? Where did they almost go wrong?
Right. Um, I absolutely do. But as you said, confidentiality makes it difficult to speak to these in a public way. Let me give you an example in an anonymized way of a near miss that one of my clients had. Company is in the FTSE 250, so a good size organization. And the kind of company that I'm really delighted to be working with, because they've got the culture right and they have a genuine focus on sustainability. They had developed a few years ago a facility which they had invested a lot of time and resources in to achieve a net zero certification in respect of the facility. And the marketing team prepared a press release saying that this facility was the first net zero facility of its kind in the UK. And it may well have been. It may well have been. But they didn't actually have the data to validate that. They
Mm.
hadn't done the research. And when they sent it to their sustainability colleagues for review, those colleagues raised the alarm and said, hang on a minute, how do we know that we are the first? How do we know that we are the first? And that opened a discussion which ultimately led to them adopting still very positive very positive language of leading the way, which they could confidently use. But what they avoided, I think, again through a bit of careful governance and just having the culture right, was making a claim that they had done the first of something, when they weren't absolutely sure. And that was an example, I think, of a company almost going wrong, but actually ultimately getting it right and still achieving the positive impact that they wanted to achieve through the press release that they put out, but doing it in a way that was less likely to invoke the kinds of greenwashing risks that we need to be increasingly careful to guard against.
Yeah, I have the Carlsberg, probably the first
Right, right.
going through my mind.
It's exactly that. And I'll go back to what I said before again. That path to greenwashing is paved with good intentions, right? I'm
Yeah,
sure there were only good
yeah.
intentions behind that draft com that came out, um, but they just couldn't validate it. They just couldn't validate it.
It's that, and it's testing yourself. It's, as you say, that desire to be good and to be demonstrating to the world that you're doing good, and none of it is done through Machiavellian tendencies. It is
Right,
done through ambition. It's done through enthusiasm, and a desire for good. But yeah, I always used to say to my clients, "How do you demonstrate that? How do
right,
you demonstrate that whatever it is that you are a good company? How do you
right.
actually prove that?" I
And
think
it
is
can be
really,
done, and it can be done, but it requires getting the governance right. It requires
yeah,
having taken the time, not rushing the claims out the door, doing the validation, having the data in place, so that if someone does come along and say, "What do you mean by this?" Here's the answer. Or better yet, it means including the relevant data in the sustainability claim itself, so that they don't have to come to you and say, "How do you know?" Because it's really clear what you mean in the first instance. One of the really fun pieces of advice and a sort of top tip that I can also offer to your listeners is to be very careful of anything that feels a little bit overly effusive. So I don't know about your experience when you were practicing lawyer, Philippa, and particularly in your earlier years, but certainly in my earlier years, whenever I drafted a piece of work or an email or something, and I put it in front of whichever partner I was working with, it would always come back covered in red pen. Of course, it was. I was still learning. But one of the things that they would always do is take anything absolute, very, will, and they'd soften it into might or may. Even if they knew that it was very or it will do X, there was just that natural aversion to risk that I think is inherent in a lot of lawyers that caused them to ameliorate any quote unquote absolute language that I had included in my drafting into something a little bit softer. And one of the things that I see companies doing from time to time is just using language that's too effusive, and you read it and you go, really, So when you see something like sustainability is everything to us, or it's central to our business, yeah, okay. I mean, if it is, then great. But if that's maybe just a little effusive, right? Sometimes what we need to do is just work with our clients to just soften that language into something that is still positive, but that's less likely to expose them to that risk, um, but B, that they can truly substantiate by reference to their actual initiatives, their actual investments, and their actual ongoing projects. You mentioned earlier that concept of green wishing. The first time I saw that language actually was in the excellent work that was released, I think, last year by the Transition Planning Task Force. So they published a document which gives really good guidance to companies on how they can prepare credible transition plans. One of the one of the pieces of advice is that companies should avoid green wishing, which they defined as placing an overly optimistic reliance upon future technologies that they hope will emerge to help them on their decarbonisation journey. And again, that's the kind of language and conduct where it comes with good intentions. We've got a transition plan. This is how we're going to do it. But when you then pick beneath the surface, okay, well, are we greenwashing here? Is this a bit effusive? Is this a bit too absolute? And if it is, and it's not always, but if it is, let's just work together to reflect on it and perhaps amend it in the way that, as I told you before, um, my client did when they were faced with this. We were the first. Actually, we're not sure we were the first. So let's just change our approach to that language slightly.
Yeah, it's just keeping yourself honest, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
testing and challenging yourself, testing yourself.
Right. And actually, one of
Um,
the best pieces of advice that I heard recently from a GC was to treat sustainability claims like their financial claims. Apply the same level of audit governance and rigor to sustainability claims that we would apply to financial claims in our annual report. And if it wouldn't pass that same threshold, be rid of it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we have to pass all of our financial promotions
Right.
through our compliance team, of course.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Talking of advice, we may have some members of boards listening to this podcast. What's the most useful question that a chair of a board can ask at the end of a sustainability discussion?
So again, um, that's a question with a lot of nuance. Depends. It goes without saying on the discussion, but I think that if what we've been listening to is a discussion about a proposed initiative, and that's what's come to the board is they want to sign off on something. Um, I guess firstly, if it hasn't already been discussed, and it should have been discussed, but if it has not yet, question number one is what's the business case for this initiative, and how does it support our business plan? And what I mean by that is, I think it's really important when businesses are engaging with sustainability and ESG to recognize that businesses can't do everything all at once. It's too much, it's too complicated. And so what we need to do is focus on those initiatives that can have the biggest impact and that will resonate with our key stakeholders. Where I think a lot of businesses have struggled is that they have embarked upon particular initiatives, again, with the best of intentions, but they struggle to explain how those initiatives support the core business to either drive revenue or save costs.
Mhm.
And so I think that one of the things a good board will do is ensure that the initiatives that we are prioritizing are those that will support the financial success of the business, because it's those initiatives that will withstand turbulent times and stakeholders, particularly investors, who are less minded towards climate and ESG considerations. And we've seen the impact of that blowback over the last year in particular. Those organizations that will be able to stay the course are those organizations that can clearly articulate the business value that is being generated by these projects and these initiatives. So if it's not already been discussed, I think that's question number one. On a more practical level, if I was the chair of that board committee, I would be asking, what are the timelines that we're following to deliver this initiative? And what are the metrics that we're going to use to track our success? What are the timelines and what are the metrics? And I think that as well actually is a feature of, only because we touched on it before, really credible transition plans or really credible ESG strategies, right? We've got these big overarching goals and objectives, and they're often pegged to 2040 or 2050, and that's fine. But what marks out a document or a plan with real integrity is the fact that there's those interim targets, there's clear metrics, and then actually as well there's clear budget, right, that has been allocated and directed. So yeah, if we haven't already discussed it, let's be really clear on the business case for the initiative, and assuming that we have discussed that, what's the timeline and what are the metrics that we're going to use to judge our progress and ultimately our success.
Excellent. I mean, the same as any project,
Right.
frankly, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's just smart goals.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I have really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, Joshua. I have a few quick fire questions for
Hit
you.
me.
So you don't have very long to answer these. So the biggest ESG myth that you would like to retire?
That ESG is dead or isn't relevant. It's never been alive or more important.
Thank you. One book, one tool, and one habit that you would recommend to sustainability leaders?
One book, one tool, one habit. Let me start with a habit. A really important habit that I have learned to develop is to avoid spending too much time looking at the news, particularly bad news. There's so much of it, particularly in the climate space. Actually, a lot of it is often fake news, to use the term, or it's news from sources that have a particular agenda. I think if we're going to succeed as sustainability professionals, our own work has to be sustainable, and that means preserving our mental health and, to an extent, shielding ourselves from the maelstrom of bad news that's just constantly circulating, which actually often is misplaced. So, a habit: avoid spending too much time looking at the news. And if you feel yourself getting weighed down by it, just step away and change your environment and come back to it later. If something is so important that you need to know about it, you'll hear about it through the grapevine, but don't spend too much time indulging in it. A tool that I think is really important to my success: coffee, to be taken religiously at 6:30 in the morning, with 10 minutes of garden as well, because nothing is more soothing to start the day than the sound of Monty Don
I
floating.
love Gardener's World.
It's me too, and I record it on a Friday night, and I watch 10 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, just to put me in a good mood with a nice cup of coffee. I guess a slightly less flippant answer, and maybe going back to the previous question, there's a really excellent website that was launched beginning of this year, early last year, called Forward Law Review, and they report on, in quite a sort of factual way, developments with a particular focus on legal and policy developments and case law developments across the spectrum of ESG issues. They do a sort of once a day 5 o'clock mail blast with sort of key news stories. And I do find that a useful tool just to stay up to date with the developments that I need to know about. I'm going to declare an interest. I do occasionally write a column for them, which is good fun. But actually, they're great writers, and they produce good work. So that's something I really do recommend to your listeners. A book. So my favorite book in the climate space, and I've read 50 of them at this point, is a wonderful book by Robin Wall Kimmerer called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's utterly beautiful. It reads like a poem in many places. It reduced me to tears on a few occasions, but it reminded me very powerfully why I cared about this stuff and what it means to be someone who is climate and sustainability minded. If it's of interest, I actually wrote an article listing my top 10 books on all things climate, and perhaps we can include a link to that in the show notes so that your listeners can go and have a look. But you'll find Braiding Sweetgrass at the top of that list, and I really commend it to all of the listeners as just a wonderful book generally, but particularly for those of us who are interested in this kind of work.
We will do that. We will definitely do that. And my final question: what makes you optimistic right now?
It's a great question. My answer to this question, and I've answered it several times, remains as ever the team that I am part of, the team that is doing this work. There is a team of millions around the world, and our ranks are growing at the rate of thousands a day. And we speak every language, and we are in every country. And some of us are the poorest people on the planet, and some of us are the richest of billionaires. And collectively, we are working this challenge from every aspect. We are applying pressure to the system in every way. We don't sleep. We are always on. We are some of the most courageous, committed, and creative souls that you will find on this little blue marble that we call our home. And collectively, we are having a huge impact. And if we weren't, you wouldn't be seeing the pushback that we are seeing coming from certain quarters. In some respects, it's a measure of our success that certainly some of the entrenched interests out there are so desperate to preserve their businesses and their models that they're fighting back in often dishonest ways, if I can put it like that. You and I, Philippa, and the people who are listening to this podcast, whether we like it or not, are part of that team. And you and I will never meet 99.9% of our teammates because there's just too many of us. But when I go to sleep at night, I know that there are people in Hong Kong and people in Buenos Aires who are picking up the work. And when I wake up in the morning and they get some rest, I'm going to pick up the baton where they left off. And that team is unavoidably having a huge impact. And I think that as our ranks continue to swell, the change that we will collectively affect um, is going to become more impactful by the day, the week, and the year. So what makes me optimistic? It's the people that I meet every day. It's the people that I see doing this work. It's the young people, some of whom I mentor through a mentorship program that I run through Gen R Law. They're brilliant. They're in their early 20s and they're 10 years ahead of where I was at their age. And if these are the people that are going to be leading tomorrow, then you and I can retire knowing that we're well looked after, Philippa. So that's what makes me optimistic. The team of us that are doing this work.
That seems a beautiful place to stop. Joshua, I have loved talking to you today, finding out all about Gen R Law and this incredible, radical, brave, brilliant choice that you have made. And I wish you all the luck in the world with it. And we will definitely stay in touch.
That's
Joshua,
very, very kind, Philippa.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with the work that you guys are doing at Paradigm Norton, because equally it's bold and it's important, and I commend the work that you're doing with all the force at my command. So thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.